Going to be a brief philosophical lecture today, and the lecture theme is going to be about promptly, why does space-time exist rather than not exist? And why does space-time exist rather than not exist across the entire omniverse, or multiverse, pluriverse, metaverse, universe? And I have kind of a whimsical answer. And that answer is my kind of hypothesis or philosophical thought experiment kind of proposal or hypothesized solution is the autopoiesis and oneiropoiesis of omnipresent Platonic forms, which have fuzzy logic nodules or graph theory nodules, which govern them from the Platonic form, highest great level, ontic or ontological level, great chain of being, down to the Planckian sub-Planckian volume of infinitesimal kind of corporalization or physicalization or materialization, etc., etc. So to begin this lecture, I will say, well, what is space and what is time? Now, I am an agnostic if space-time exists, but I believe that many people have, assuming that, that non-externalist solipsism is not elephantologically, pragmatically true, then that kind of subsumes that there are various kind of relativistic answers as to why the kind of Platonic kind of extension of points into hypermodalities of post-Platonic kind of manifestation of physicalization or corporalization or even atomization in the Bertrand Russell Quinean and Scomian kind of logic, or I suppose a Fregean kind of positivistic mere teleological set theoretic sense. Now, time, whether it's simply, the Einsteinian or post-Einsteinian Minkowskian relativistic kind of space-time dilation, I'm not sure, especially given kind of hyper-Minogian impossible universes, which may or may not truly logically exist. So now, in terms of the Oneiropoiesis or self-perceiving dreams, or Autopoiesis or self-perceiving panpsychism, abstracta, which I argue may exist due to the idealism of absolute infinity, and absolute infinity is mere topologically, or set theoretica, contained within this omniverse, this universe, this monadistic kind of set aggregation of all possible abstracta. Well, then one can kind of inductively derive that space-time is an Oneiropoietic Platonic abstracta governed by the kind of modal incorporation or the modal transubstantiation of fuzzy logic spectra. And this spectra kind of precludes that a Platonic form can be hyper, don't mind the radio, I'm just on vacation. But I will say that one thing to quickly add is that the abstracta of all possible Meinongian operators precludes that the ontology of whether physical or anti-physical matter or non-idealistic matter exists as quantum superposition given your many worlds kind of Minkowskian framework, at least from my understanding of quantum metaphysics rather than just physics, whether in the, the Minskian or Norbert Wiener or Noetherian or even Chomserian Jungian sense and reference. So I will say that the Oneiropoiesis of self-perceiving Platonic forms, or simply Platonic brute mereological aggregates, very well could provide kind of a, not an entirely fictitious, but pseudo, at least meta-empirically grounded kind of Quinean natural synthetic realism answer, that namely that both idealistic mental objects and physicalistic brute fact qualic mind independent abstracta or concrete abstracta exist omnipresently throughout our omniverse and are often governed by the laws of temporiscidality, though not exclusively so, given simply whether one lives in a solipsistic anti-Cartesian omniverse or not, or multiverse or universe. Now, whether the question is whether time exists, does it have to be a chronopsychic one? I do not know. I'm an agnostic currently about that, but I will propose it anyways. And I will add that the flowing of time, whether it must be governed by the kind of Berkeleyan horological clocks, even if they're not ever panpsychically perceived, or whether they might be zeptosecondly or oneiropsychic entities, and thus that led to the first abstract temporicity or first object in time, after absolute zero. Now, what flowed after absolute zero, I don't absolutely know. But I will say that my hypothesis simply for why space-time exists is it's governed by the autopoiesis or oneiropoiesis of Platonic abstracta on the level of self-perceiving to self-under-perceiving, or absolutely autopoietic, pan-experientialist, or absolutely non-mind independently governed. So therefore, I argue that the autopoiesis, the oneiropoiesis, schizopoiesis, omnipoiesis of self-perceiving zeptosecond to absolute infinite on a fuzzy logic spectral, pan-experientialist or cosmopsychic entities, basically auto-perceiving themselves, leads to the eventual predicate of, according to calculus, omnipresent existence of space-time across all ever its many framework indices or matrices or ontologies or onticities or ontophyogonies, even in the theogonical omniverse or universe. So I will conclude that if space-time exists, the question of why abstracta and monogean or simply Platonic, not nomianistic, nominalistic, etc., depending if you believe in sub-philosophies themselves subatomically and sub-philosophically exist, or sub-metaphilosophically exist, rather, then we can therefore conclude that the pan-experientialism of oneiropoiesis of the hybrid block eternalistic, sempiternal, omnitemporal universe of autopoietic and oneiropoietic and omnipoietic beings or entities from a zeptosecond large to an absolute infinitely large in a fuzzy logic spectra, basically Pythagorean eternalism or eternalism, if you believe in eternity, in the John McTaggart kind of chronopsychic philosophy, well, then you can deduce or induce. But otherwise, I will conclude this lecture by saying, ask yourself 3 questions today. Does pan-experientialism of schizopoiesis or omnipoiesis or oneiropoiesis lead to the chronopsychism of the first zeptosecond after 0 of time existed? 2, why does pan-experientialism and quantum Berkeleyanism preclude the sapiens, quantum entanglement and disentanglement, the flowing of chronosphesia and chronopsychism? 3, finally, the temporicidality and plus the temporicity, boundless kind of perpetual abstraction and subtraction, kind of in a Scrabble-like algebra and brain world mapping of all possible abstracta from zeptosecond or absolute infinitesimal to absolutely infinite omega and alpha. This includes some kind of subset mere topological discussion of Frank Tipler's point omega pointillism, or does it not? But otherwise, do you believe that the oneiropoiesis of all schizopoietic or omnipoietic from absolute infinitesimal, say zeptosecond Planck clock level entities to absolute infinite or Graham's number, even transfinite out of null entities, therefore led to the existence of why spacetime rather than exist rather than not exist? Why spacetime exists rather than not exist? So have a wonderful day. Meets us well. Thank you so much.